Imagine waking up in a world where no one has ever heard the word bacteria. No microscopes, no germ theory, no idea that invisible organisms could move from one person's hands to another and quietly spread disease. Now, ask yourself this. Would anyone still bother washing their hands? Most people would probably say no. It seems logical to assume that hand washing only became important after science revealed the hidden world of microbes. But history tells a far more surprising story. Long before doctors understood infection, long before laboratories could reveal what the human eye could never see, people across ancient civilizations were already washing their hands every single day. The Romans did it before meals as an ordinary social custom. Ancient Egyptians cleaned themselves with early forms of soap made from animal fat and plant ash. Across the Islamic world, ritual washing became part of daily religious life centuries before modern medicine existed. Jewish traditions prescribed detailed hand-washing practices for different moments throughout the day. In many cultures, clean hands represented respect, purity, discipline, and spiritual readiness, not protection from microscopic life. And that's what makes this story so fascinating. For thousands of years, humanity was practicing one of the most effective forms of disease prevention, completely without realizing why it worked. They had no concept of viruses, no understanding of bacteria, no knowledge of germs traveling from contaminated hands to food, water, or other people. Yet, by following customs, traditions, and religious rituals, they were accidentally interrupting the spread of countless dangerous diseases. How could an entire world benefit from a medical practice without understanding the science behind it? Why did civilizations separated by thousands of miles develop remarkably similar habits around washing? And if these ancient practices were already saving lives, why did it take modern medicine so long to recognize something that had been hiding in plain sight for centuries? To answer those questions, we have to step back into a time when disease was explained not by invisible microbes, but by something people could actually smell, see, and believe. For most of human history, disease was not imagined as something carried by tiny living organisms. That idea would have sounded impossible. After all, if something cannot be seen, touched, or smelled, how could anyone believe it existed? Instead, many civilizations relied on an explanation that felt perfectly reasonable based on everyday experience. When people walked past stagnant swamps, overflowing sewage, or piles of rotting waste, they noticed something obvious. The air smelled terrible, and places with terrible smells often seemed to have more sickness and death than places with fresh air. From these observations grew one of history's most influential medical ideas, the belief that disease came from polluted or poisonous air. Today we call it the miasma theory. Although the theory was ultimately incorrect, it wasn't created out of ignorance. It was built from careful observation. Crowded cities often experienced devastating outbreaks. Dirty neighborhoods usually had more illness than cleaner ones. Poor ventilation seemed to make sickness spread more easily. The conclusions were understandable. Only the hidden cause was wrong. Because of this way of thinking, cleanliness still mattered, but for completely different reasons than we recognize today. People washed to remove unpleasant smells. They cleaned themselves because society expected it. They bathed to feel refreshed. Religious traditions encouraged physical purity before worship. None of these actions were connected to invisible germs because germs were still beyond human imagination. Ironically, however, these habits were quietly accomplishing something extraordinary. Every time someone washed dirt from their hands before eating, every time they cleaned themselves after handling waste, every time they rinsed away grease, soil, or bodily fluids, they were unknowingly removing countless microorganisms that could have caused serious illness without realizing it. They were breaking chains of infection that no one even knew existed. Perhaps the greatest irony in medical history is this: people were successfully protecting themselves from diseases centuries before they understood what they were being protected from. Sometimes human behavior discovers the right solution long before science discovers the correct explanation. And nowhere is that more evident than in the remarkable relationship between religion, ritual, and hygiene. Long before hospitals, laboratories, or medical textbooks existed, another force was quietly shaping human hygiene: religion. Early. Every major civilization developed rituals that required washing before certain moments, not because people feared disease, but because they believed cleanliness prepared the body and mind for something greater. To modernize, these practices may appear purely symbolic, but history tells a far more remarkable story. In Jewish tradition, washing the hands became an important part of daily religious life. Certain activities required ritual cleansing before a person could eat, pray, or participate in sacred practices. Centuries later, Islamic teachings established one of the most consistent hygiene routines in history. Before every prayer, believers performed wudu times, washing the hands, face, mouth, nose, arms, and feet several times each day. For millions of people, this wasn't a medical recommendation. It was an act of worship. Across South Asia, Hindu traditions emphasized bathing and purification before many religious ceremonies, reinforcing habits of regular washing that became woven into everyday life. Even Buddhist monasteries developed detailed rules about personal cleanliness. Monks lived in close communities where simple routines of washing helped create healthier living conditions, despite no one understanding the invisible biological reasons behind their effectiveness. What's fascinating is that these cultures often developed similar behaviors despite being separated by vast distances, different languages, and entirely different beliefs. They arrived at the same habit through different paths. Some washed to honor God. Some washed to achieve ritual purity. Others washed out of respect for family, guests, or society. The motivations were completely different. The outcome was remarkably similar. Every rinse of water removed dirt. Every cleaned hand carried away countless microorganisms. Every repeated ritual quietly reduced opportunities for disease to spread from one person to another. History is filled with inventions that became useful after people understood them. Handwashing was the opposite. Humanity benefited from it for thousands of years before anyone understood why it worked. And while water alone offered important protection, another ancient invention would eventually make this everyday habit far more powerful than anyone could have imagined. That invention was soap. Soap feels so ordinary today that it's easy to forget how remarkable it really is. Walk into any home, hotel, or public restroom, and you'll probably find a bar of soap or a bottle of liquid cleanser sitting nearby without giving it a second thought. But thousands of years ago, soap was already changing human history long before anyone understood the chemistry that made it so effective. Some of the earliest evidence comes from ancient Babylon, where people mixed natural oils with alkaline substances to create a cleaning material. It wasn't originally designed to protect human health. In many cases, it was used to wash textiles, remove grease from wool, and clean valuable fabrics. Over time, civilizations discovered that similar mixtures also worked remarkably well for cleaning the human body. The Egyptians developed cleansing pastes made from animal fat and plant ash. The Romans refined the art of soap making, although their famous bathhouses often relied more on olive oil and metal scrapers called strigils to lift dirt from the skin before rinsing it away. Centuries later, cities such as Aleppo in Syria and regions of Spain became famous for producing high-quality soaps that were traded across continents. Yet something extraordinary was happening behind every wash. No soap maker understood molecules. No merchant knew anything about viruses. No customer had ever heard the word bacteria. People simply noticed that soap cleaned better than water alone. What they couldn't possibly see was the invisible battle taking place on their skin. Modern science has revealed that each soap molecule has two different ends. One end is attracted to water. The other is attracted to oils and fats. Many dangerous microorganisms, including numerous viruses and certain bacteria, are protected by thin layers of fat. When soap is rubbed across the hands, those fatty layers begin to break apart. Dirt, grease, and microbes become trapped within tiny clusters of soap molecules, allowing clean water to wash them safely away. In other words, every time an ancient person used soap, they were performing surprisingly sophisticated chemistry without realizing it. They believed they were simply removing dirt. In reality, they were destroying one of nature's most effective hiding places for infectious organisms. But even with cleaner hands and better soap, one enormous mystery remained. If washing works so well, did doctors themselves continue spreading deadly infections for centuries without recognizing the danger? The answer would emerge inside one hospital, through the observations of a single physician whose discovery was so shocking that much of the medical world refused to believe him. The physician's name was Ignaz Semmelweis. Today, he is remembered as one of the pioneers of modern medical hygiene, but during his own lifetime, many of his colleagues dismissed his ideas as impossible. The story began in the 1840s at Vienna General Hospital, one of Europe's leading medical institutions. The hospital operated 2 maternity clinics, and at first glance they appeared almost identical. They admitted similar patients, treated women in the same city, and followed nearly the same procedures. Yet one horrifying difference separated them. In the first clinic, where doctors and medical students delivered babies, mothers died from childbed fever at an alarmingly high rate. In the second clinic, staffed mainly by midwives, far fewer women lost their lives. The difference wasn't small. It was so frightening that many pregnant women begged to be admitted to the second clinic instead. Some even chose to give birth outside the hospital rather than risk entering the first ward. For years, no one could explain why. Some blamed overcrowding. Others blamed poor ventilation. A few even suggested that fear itself somehow caused the illness. None of those explanations fit the evidence. Semmelweis decided to do something that many others had failed to do. He paid close attention to patterns. Every morning, doctors and medical students spent hours performing autopsies on patients who had died. Without thoroughly cleaning their hands, they walked directly into the maternity ward and began examining women who were about to give birth. The midwives did no such work. That single difference refused to leave Semmelweis's mind. He proposed a radical idea, perhaps something invisible. Not bad air, not fear, but tiny particles from the bodies of the dead was being carried on the hands of physicians into the delivery room. There was no microscope capable of proving his theory. No one knew about bacteria. No one had identified infectious microorganisms. Still, Semmelweis trusted the evidence in front of him. He introduced a simple rule. Before touching any patient, every doctor and medical student had to wash their hands with a chlorinated lime solution. The results were astonishing. Within months, deaths from childbed fever fell dramatically, dropping to levels nearly identical to those in the midwives' clinic. Thousands of lives could have been saved if hospitals everywhere had adopted the same practice immediately. But that isn't what happened. Instead of celebrating the discovery, much of the medical community rejected it. Accepting Semmelweis's conclusion meant accepting something deeply uncomfortable, that respected physicians were unintentionally causing the deaths of the very people they had sworn to heal. For many, that idea was simply too painful to believe. Without a scientific explanation for why Time's handwashing worked, many doctors dismissed the evidence, ignored the results, and continued practicing as they always had. Semmelweis spent years defending his findings, yet recognition never came during his lifetime. He died without seeing the medical revolution his observations had begun. Only decades later, after scientists such as Louis Pasteur and Joseph Lister established the foundations of germ theory and antiseptic medicine, did the world finally understand what Semmelweis had discovered. His greatest achievement wasn't inventing hand washing. People had been washing their hands for thousands of years. His achievement was revealing that clean hands could mean the difference between life and death. And once humanity finally understood the invisible world of microbes, hand-washing transformed from an ancient habit into one of the most powerful and scientifically supported tools in the history of medicine. Today, whether in hospitals, homes, schools, or restaurants, the simple act of washing our hands continues to save millions of lives every year. It stands as a remarkable reminder that sometimes humanity discovers the right habit long before it discovers the reason, and that the smallest daily actions can quietly shape the course of history.